Welcome, Dr. Lori and Jerry, to the show today here. We're so excited to have you guys. So many things to dive into and talk about in terms of all that you do to support our schools, kind of behind the scenes. So really very excited to have you join us and dig right in. So gosh, where to dig in? I warned you guys that we would start in a kind of silly way because we're going to talk about some heavy stuff. So it's always fun for our listeners to get to know you a little bit. Quite a few of them already know you because of the help that you give our school communities. But as experts in the field in crisis communication, I don't know, it sounds very serious. There are things about you that I've come to know that are special giftings, I'll say. So what are some things that would be kind of unexpected or surprising maybe to listeners to hear about these two experts that we have here? Just one crazy super secret superpower that you have or...
Well, I can go first, Jerry. Give you a chance to think. I actually knew this was coming, so I asked my husband, what would you say is my superpower? And he didn't even hesitate. And he's like, well, he goes, you have this ability to see that something is off center or turned 10 degrees in our home and you correct it right away. And this actually played out when I was a school superintendent after successfully passing a couple of capital improvement referendums with our community. And you would spend all this energy putting all of this effort into designing like the perfect cafeteria space. And when it came to life, I would walk in the school and the first thing I would do is go around and adjust the furniture the way it's supposed to be in my head. So I think he's right that's my superpower is I can see when things are out of place and I need to fix it right away.
I think there's a metaphor in there. I think that's...
There might be.
Yeah, but I have to say that I share that superpower. I'm not comfortable really even like in a space until I have gone around and just kind of
I feel you then. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's so funny. We could talk. Okay, you're up, Jerry.
Boy, I don't know if it's a superpower, but I have such a deep affection and passion for public education because my mother was my kindergarten teacher. And so that first step into education where you have the nurturing component of it was doubly more effective for me because it was mom. Now I struggled because I was sharing mom with all of these other 5-year-olds that I didn't understand why this was happening. But also at that time, we had half-day kindergarten and I stayed for the full day. So I felt like coming out of it, I was prepared for first grade because I got twice the lessons that anybody else did. And so I felt like a step ahead early on in my educational career because of that. But in all seriousness, just the love of public education was bestowed upon me through my mom and having her as my kindergarten teacher. Lost her to cancer a number of years ago, but that rests with me every single day.
Oh man, that's special. And that is absolutely a superpower. And one also that I can relate to, my mom. I went to school wherever she taught up until 8th grade. And so there were times I never had her as like my homeroom teacher, but when we would switch for like social studies or whatever. And I don't know, we'll have to talk about, did you struggle as a kid to call her Mrs. Gallagher or like, I was like, Mrs. Mom? I don't know.
Hey, Mom, over here.
So funny. Such a weird thing to navigate, but special and what a gift as well. That's amazing. Yeah. Awesome. So that really, I think that really helps us kind of set the tone and even gives us some kind of jumping off points. You guys, from kindergarten until this day have journeyed in such a way through public education, through schools and communities, as educators, as leaders, and now support schools in such a unique way. So I kind of want to talk about that first, just to give our folks a little bit of a sense of what you're bringing to us here at the Sound Off today. So how do you serve today? What is it that, how do you apply that love of, of schools and that passion and that dedication of getting everything just right to the schools and communities that you serve?
What a great question. I think for me, I really feel grateful that I've had the years of experience I have as an educator and also in various roles, including that superintendency role, that prepared me to be on the other side of the phone or a Zoom meeting like this with superintendents across the country, supporting them with maybe issues that I've already experienced in my past and learned, right? Lessons learned about how to maybe best proceed. And so that's what I'm excited about with the work that we do, is that I feel it's an opportunity to give back. Because I was a recipient of support from the Donovan Group when I was having my worst day as a superintendent. And, it's sometimes very lonely at the top, maybe more than sometimes. It's just lonely at the top. And it's hard to find those supports that that you can just be confident that you're going to get the best advice, that someone else has gone through something similar, and so that you can lean into that a little bit as well. But that's what we do at the Donovan Group, is we are there to support school districts, school divisions, superintendents, school boards in doing anything that involves communications and community engagement. And one of our specialties, I think, is being on the other side of the phone when there is a crisis, and noting that anybody really can create a communication for a crisis. However, when you're going through it yourself, you're in that fight or flight, right? Fight or flight or freeze, maybe, mode. And so it's just great to know that there's this resource that you can reach out to, and we can take care of taking care of your families and students and staff who need to know information right away.
Well said. And I think the other thing that I'd love for us to dig into a little bit is about, in that moment, a lot of educators are really good. They're good communicators, right? A lot of our school leaders are good communicators. They communicate complicated information to young minds on a regular basis, and to to families and community members. But it is a different thing to have to communicate in the middle of some kind of crisis, and it is pretty impossible, I think, as a school leader to not be impacted in some way by what's going on. So I think I'd like for us to come back to that. But Jerry, I would love to hear from you a little bit about, how you landed in this place and are serving in this way.
I don't know how I can measure up to Lori's answer, first of all.
Stop.
Good grief.
No, Jerry has a very interesting background. Yeah.
I know.
18 years as a journalist and a news anchor, I think, prepared me for this career in many ways, as Lori described, because I was on the other end of the phone and I was the one asking the questions. And so to have the compassion and empathy to be able to assist, but also to prepare schools for what is coming when that crisis happens, and how to navigate what can be a media monsoon, I think is what
That's a really good way to put it.
Is where I have landed here in a space that I think I benefit schools on a daily basis, but also to help them understand to not run from the media necessarily, if there are ways to be able to develop positive professional partnerships that will benefit you when the chips are down. And so I think I've been able to bring that, at least in some small measure, to the Donovan Group in assisting schools.
Oh, there's a lot there. I think it takes me right back to Newtown in, 2012, when you talk about the relationships with the media. We had some really solid, conscientious journalists, members of the media in and around our community. And without the really solid relationships with them, it was really challenging to have to navigate everyone's roles. And, I think everybody wanted to help, truly, but it was sometimes very unhelpful and sometimes harmful, the choices, that folks were making in their messaging or deciding to not talk to the media. And it was a real challenge in our community. So, that in and of itself, I feel like could have mitigated a lot of hurt, a lot of trauma, and protected people, and families and victims at a really vulnerable time. So much to dig into there. So let's first define, when we talk about crisis communications, which is, you guys are involved in all kinds of communication support for our schools and communities. It's like all day long. The better you can communicate, the more successful you're going to be as a district. But this crisis communication piece is a totally different animal. And I think it's worth it for us to just sit there for a few minutes, talk about that, explore that, talk about how it's a whole thing that we need to have a different mindset for, different skill set, different resources. Let's kind of dig in there so we better define that for our schools and communities. And hopefully they don't find themselves in the place that our community did.
I think defining a crisis is probably the first step, Michele. And I'm not sure that it is a black and white definition across the board.
Right.
These are conversations that schools, school boards, administrative teams need to have from within about how would you define a crisis. I think it's really easy to say, if it disrupts learning, then perhaps we need to communicate to our audience, our stakeholders, our community, what happened, what are we doing to fix it or to mediate the situation, and then follow up once it's resolved. So a disruption to learning, I think, is something to understand. But then again, there are silos within that. If you are at a large school district, you might have 20 buildings and perhaps it's only one building that's affected. And so that's a different kind of crisis communication than if it were every campus being affected.
I hadn't thought of that point though about, let's talk about what is a crisis? When does it hit that threshold that we have to communicate differently?
Yes.
From our toolbox, crisis comes in so many different shapes and forms, and in so many unexpected things happen in school every single day, right? So a lot of those things, I think they would rise to the definition of crisis, and maybe we're not really even recognizing that, So let's dig in a little bit there. Maybe Lori, talk about what are some examples of things that you would say, you know what, guys, this is a crisis. Maybe there hasn't been a loss of life. Maybe, it's not a mass casualty event. I think probably that's what a lot of people are thinking of, something really, really high impact, or, something very tragic is where most people are going in their heads when we talk about crisis. But let's talk about that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Michele. Yeah, I think we'll say this to all those that we work with, that we define crisis as something that could be just merely embarrassing to something that is super tragic and everything in the middle. And often we will get calls from superintendents that will say, I'm calling you because I think I need a crisis communication. I think this is a crisis. And we always say, if you're calling because you feel like it's a crisis, then it's a crisis, right? We're here to support you. And so some examples of what we may experience in a typical day or week or month when we support school districts across the country is we'll get a lot of crisis communications that are needed as a statement to send out to students, staff, families because of perhaps a threat that's been made on social media. Sometimes a crisis could even be just misinformation that's circulating on social media. We have crises in schools all the time with fights, harassment, bullying. We, have sometimes loss of life due to mental health issues, both with students and staff. Sometimes we'll get a call because a student or a staff member has been in an accident and they're no longer going to be at school. We do a lot of crisis communications for inappropriate, student and adult behaviors in schools that create a disruption in learning, as Jerry shared. And so really can be just about anything. I think we had, this year alone, I'm getting a smirk on my face because sometimes they're interesting, right? Like, oh, we have a bat infestation. We need to communicate to our community that we have too many bats that have infested our school, and so we need to take a pause and close school for a few days to deal with this. Or sometimes it can be a gas leak. So there's really anything that I think not only creates a disruption in learning, but also threatens the capital or success or trust that our students, our families, or community members have in the school or the school system. And that's really hard when you're the leader of a school system and you feel that threat to that capital that you have worked so hard to build, and that value proposition that you give to your families, that we're here for your kids. So really anything that threatens that, I think, could be defined as a crisis.
That's a really good point. You're making me think of a time when the high school that my girls went to, we had, actually it was the middle school, we had a mold issue. A lot of our buildings are, there's an asbestos thing or a mold thing or something structural. And the way that affected the trust level in the community was pretty intense. I just remember kind of watching how they were communicating and how they were they kind of learning on the fly. Okay, we need to have a steady drip of updates for the families, that they need to know, what the testing levels are coming in, that we've got the EPA involved, all of that, to just kind of really earn that back, because it pretty quickly people kind of get in their corners and start to think, well, they're not sharing everything that we need to know.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for that. I like to lean into what you just said about steady drip of information. That's something we're learning as we do this work, is that when there is a potential crisis, it's so important to try to communicate the facts as quickly as possible with our stakeholders or audiences. And sometimes we find that, and I don't know if this is just our profession or just the people-pleasing nature of individuals, that we feel like we have to have all the facts first prior to communicating. And we're finding that it's much more effective to share what we can when we have it, and let our families know when to expect the next communication. And with crisis communications, also sharing how we're going to move forward from whatever it is that's transpiring. I'm sure.
I'm a big fan of this. I'm a big fan of this. As somebody who, was stuck in that position of waiting for information to come, there was that almost, it's just almost like an instinct, I think, like, especially if you are in education, you want to have everything all buttoned up, all the facts. You don't want to make a single mistake. And so as a result, you're taking a lot of extra time. And, people really just appreciate, here's what we know happened. Here's what we're doing. I like how you talk about that, Jerry. I'd love for you to kind of dig in here on this, but you kind of laid out like kind of the three things we got to do when we know we have a crisis. We're not gonna wait to get every little fact and wait till it's been fully investigated and all of that. But what we can provide what we have. So I like how you talk about that, Jerry. If you would just kind of lay out that, it's almost like a template, of what we're going to do.
Well, we put ourselves on the clock immediately. I think that timeliness is of the essence. And I work with a school that had this happen recently, where as soon as that first report came in and they assembled their administrative leadership team to be able to converse quickly and then take that next step, the administrative team has told me that if we are not communicating within 20 minutes of that first, as soon as we get the call, we have failed. And we are going to spend the rest of the day chasing our tail.
You're going to be playing catch up for the rest of the day, 100%, because those calls start coming in, the social media networks become activated, in our case, I took off for the school because I couldn't get the information I needed. So I like that idea. Like this just came in, we're on the clock. And then as soon as we kind of hit that timer, what are we putting out? What are we saying?
And so really this is not something that is a War and Peace novel. We're talking about nuggets of information that can go out in various formats. This could be a statement to the media. And again, it goes back to part of your planning process, Michele, we believe should be, who are your trusted media outlets? Who can you?
Wait, we have to be friends beforehand, right?
Right.
We need to, and friends is a loaded word, but to have, but to have trusted partners, because you benefit from the media as they benefit from you.
Truly.
They speak to an audience that you don't in the community. And so it is important to have them run as parallel to you as possible. And I know that that's a task that is insurmountable. However, try to get there as close as you can with them. And that is part of the planning process. We can talk more about that. But that could be a media statement. It could be a parent staff communication. You really want to communicate with staff first. Am I wrong in saying that, Lori, that it's important to let your staff know what is happening before anything else?
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you. Because staff, having been a former staff member, like we get hit and we don't have the information. And when we don't have it, or we kind of are caught off guard, it looks like we're hiding something,
Correct.
And
Correct. Yep.
trust starts to erode almost instantly.
Exactly. That's what I would say. It's one of our guiding principles for communication, is to remember to communicate internally first. And it's because of the amount of capital that our staff members, our teachers have with community members and families, that they need to be able to have accurate information so that they can be a part of the team in terms of sharing what's critical information in that moment.
And depending on the crisis, we do believe that there is an avenue for social media to be a part of this. Not necessarily in every situation. And sometimes, again, it's not black and white. There's a little gray area here to determining what is your school district comfortable putting out there. But part of what we saw with what you went through, Michele, was this level of misinformation that has taken over in some way, shape, or form those platforms in our country. Yeah. And if you fall behind that, it does take over, and it can absolutely suffocate you. And so to be able to get something out on social media to help stem the tide and create that we are owning this story as quickly as possible is important.
I want everybody listening to think about that for a second as it relates to our tragedy experience in Newtown. We did have that knee-jerk kind of instinct reaction to just shut down and not communicate with the media. And we are still to this day, and probably will be for, I don't know, all of time, trying to correct that misinformation. Look at the ultimate consequence on many of our families, being stalked and attacked, and ultimately huge lawsuits and great unnecessary trauma and impact just as a result of that lack of communication and partnership. So, I mean, all these years later, right? That's how important it is. That's how important it is.
Are there vultures? There are. And and I'm not going to sit here and defend them. And most of the time they come from the outside.
Yeah.
But there are those that want to protect, those who work in the media that have kids in the school district. They might be former graduates. They have ownership there and they want to help, but you have to bring them in, and you have to bring them in before a crisis happens.
Yeah. And part of that partnership is kind of what are the sort of like boundaries of our relationship? How's this going to work for us? I mean, we had a couple even local members of the media who I really think were coming in dedication to their job and their profession and getting information out there. But without those boundaries defined, and without that conversation about, this picture that you took, yes, I know it's award winning and I know it'll make your career, but the impact that it could have on this family and this officer and, that's not okay. Can we agree that that's not okay? So kind of establishing those rules of engagement, I think, is another critical piece, because I don't think the intent was to be one of those vultures. And we certainly did see that pattern of, most of that kind of behavior was coming from, outside outlets, people that weren't invested in the community. But even locally, without those boundaries defined, I think you can kind of run into some of that harmful behavior.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's a great perspective to hear. I always feel like I learn something new every time I hear you talk. And I think that we've learned a lot, since 2012 too, about how to support school systems with crisis communication. And I know we're talking in threes here, and I think it's important to, think about number one with crisis communications is just being prepared first. So before a crisis occurs, doing everything you can in that leadership role with your capacity building to have a plan in place for when a crisis happens. Here's how we're going to communicate, who's responsible for what type of communications, and practice that, and also get maybe some professional growth around that as a public information officer, collaborating with local law enforcement, emergency management, and practicing so that when we know we're all going to deal with some level of crisis in these positions. And so being ready for what that response is going to look like through muscle memory, because we practice and we already have the partnerships in place with local media and with local law enforcement, so that we are able to finish each other's sentences and we know what to expect from each other at that time.
And even like words we're going to use and not use, right?
Yes, yeah.
These words are going to have, they're going to initiate an emotional response in people that are already very emotional. What can we do to kind of avoid we want to be trauma informed, essentially. So how can we as partners, be trauma informed in our communication? I love, though, we talk a lot about templatizing. And I know as a former superintendent, this is something that you would know, and I'm sure used all the time as a school leader, but just having sort of the framework of communications for a variety of purposes is so useful and helpful. But I love that you said practice. That's something we work on with our schools and communities in a variety of different challenging areas, like behavioral threat assessment, for example. We do a lot of tabletops with crisis planning, crisis response. We'll do a lot of tabletops, and that's where really, all the good stuff comes out. And if it's a multidisciplinary kind of a diverse group of perspectives, we really get to the good stuff. But I don't know that a lot of schools would think, we probably need to do the same thing in terms of crisis. And, there's no shortage of scenarios that we can pull from the real world just by turning on the news every night,
Exactly. As a superintendent, and I share this now too when I speak to others about crisis communications, it's really important. Like we would do this, something happens, a headline, or a story, when you're talking about different scenarios. At our next cabinet meeting, we would say, hey, did you see this headline? Let's kind of talk about what transpired, what facts we have. Okay, let's, apply this to our own situation. What if this happened here? How would we respond? Who's going to be responsible for communicating what and to whom? And doing that activity over and over again with your team, like I said before, really builds that capacity and muscle memory. And as the leader, you're training your I hate to use the word managers, because they're not managers. They're leaders themselves in their own areas, but you're building your team up to feel confident that you have their back as their superintendent to support them when they are in that fight or freeze mode, right? And so that they may not be able to think straight at that time, but because we've talked about it over and over again, they know what my expectation would be, or they would know what your expectation would be in a situation like that, because we've talked about it over and over again.
Yeah, they can literally put your hat on.
Yes.
This is what she would say. This is how she would want us to do this, because we know we've worked on this so many times. That's so valuable.
Yeah, simply put, you just can't wing it. There has to be preparation for this. And there has to be preparation in the sense of, what are you going to do when the wheels come off? And giving specific examples of what happens. How do you respond when somebody goes online and begins to spread misinformation? Do you have people in the community who will stand up? Is there a committee of parents who will stand up and defend you in that moment to help prevent one comment from turning into 50? So it goes from that brush fire into a wildfire, just like that. If you don't have people who are there to support you, all of that can be a part of preparation. It just has to be intentional. What do we need? How do we get it on paper?
That's really an interesting idea, Jerry. Like that maybe we have, I think we all, Lori, I'm sure this is something that, you were ever aware of as a school leader, but you have your champions in the community. If there's something new you have to introduce, or you need their support on this bond or whatever, you kind of go to your ambassadors. But why not establish those communication ambassadors too? I mean, we have some really wonderful parent leaders, student leaders, that we can tap into to be those ambassadors out there, kind of putting out the brush fires. I love that analogy. But when it's coming from actual community members, there's a different weight to it, than coming from the top. But if
absolutely
those are singing the same song you are, putting out correct information that you are, then that beautiful parallel begins to happen, and people are like, oh, okay, yeah, I can trust this communication.
How many times have we heard that when a tragedy happens, the community comes together? And we see it in so many different forms. We see it as, showing up together at a vigil. That's more of that quiet form of unification. Financially, we often see it. But one way that we don't see it a lot is verbally, in a written form. How can the community unite to stand in those two forms of communication to support the school district, to support the parents in need in that moment, and defend off those who are trying to really, be disruptive at a trying time?
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys heard Molly Hudgens speak the last time we had you. I think her story is a great example. She calls it like circling the wagons, and she to the student level, incorporated them into this concept of circling the wagons around this community and around this individual who ended up making the right choice, and so really using that moment to bring everybody into this. This is our message. Like, this is what happened. You can ask me anything, is what she said to students. And here are trusted, adults that you can go to if you have questions or you need to talk this out. So kind of establishing for them where they could go when they need to process or get more information. But parents, staff members, students, all committed to this as a community. That's a powerful thing. This is our message. This is our commitment. And to this day have held to that, which is just, to me, kind of mind blowing that, that many people could unite so strongly around this idea that, nope, this is not our community, with the hurts here. And, we'll take care of ourselves and, kind of insulate ourselves from anything that counters what we are trying to do here.
She created a culture.
She did. She did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of preparation or in advance of a crisis, and to, that point, we always counsel that it's really a good idea to try to inform or educate our families and staff, students, like at the start of the school year, maybe remind them throughout the course of the school year, if and when there's a crisis, here's how we're going to communicate with you. Here's where you can get the most accurate information. And again, any collaboration you can have with local law enforcement where you're doing joint statements. So that was something I leaned into as a superintendent. And I was fortunate to have a chief of police who would do that with me. That just helps build that trust too with families to know that those who are able to give us the most accurate information are collectively doing this together. So it just helps build that confidence, I feel,
Yeah.
for families. Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. So I think, a lot of these are really important takeaways for us in that before aspect of planning. Let's talk a little bit about the response. So let's talk about it lands on your desk, and hopefully you've done all of that prep work. You've created those you've built those relationships. You've, established some communications templates. You tabletopped, all of that. So now what? What do we do? The bats have infested the middle. How do we handle that? What do we do?
One of the keys right up front is setting a parameter for your future communications, which helps to create boundaries for the media and also parents who are going to be calling the front desk. And so you send out that first communication, hopefully within that 20-minute ballpark time frame, but you're ending it with, we will have subsequent communication in the next 30 minutes, or stand by for something additionally as soon as we have more information in the next 20. You're giving people an opportunity to stay with you and not venture outside for that information. So parameters are critical, I think, in that initial communication. Right? Am I correct in saying that, Lori?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, remembering or reminding yourself that you don't have to have all the facts to start that communication. So what you do have, and that's been verified so that we're not sharing misinformation, is getting out what we call sometimes a holding statement to just even make our constituents aware. We're aware that there's something transpiring. Here's what we know as facts at this point. And like Jerry said, we're going to come back to you in the next how many minutes before, we'll come back with more information. What I found helpful, particularly in a situation where we have lots of phone calls coming, like I'm talking about something tragic where the national outlets are calling, is to get that first statement and to put it on all of your voicemail messaging systems so that we can protect the front line of the offices and staff who are picking up the phone calls and getting just barraged by a number of questions that they're not ready to answer. That just helps protect the trauma that those individuals will experience. So we would read messages into our messaging system, our voice messaging system. And again, that same information will come back with additional information at this point in the day, or you can go to our website and find the most current up-to-date information. But, I think it's just really important when we're first crafting those crisis communications that it's very factual. We monitor if there's misinformation that's coming out, that we take the steps to correct that right away. And I think that we need to be careful too that if we don't do it in that holding statement, that we do it fairly quickly about how do we take care of those who are most impacted, that there's some type of messaging with that in the moment.
So I just had this aha moment as you were talking about the calling of the school. So we teach, as part of our prep for schools to set those expectations, like you said, kind of at back to school night or in whatever, little handbook sign off parents have to do at the beginning of the year. And one of the things is when we are in crisis, don't call the school. Well, I called the school. Everyone's going to call the school.
Right.
Call the school, right? So I love the idea that instead of the phone ringing and ringing and ringing and nobody picking up, and that makes me panic, I'm getting that same message. There's that message. And, because sometimes, like for me, it took a couple attempts before my mind was even really like partly functioning,
Mm-hmm.
able to go, oh, okay, I see. Of course, they're not going to pick up the phone right now, and
Right.
things started clicking. So, I could get that information, say, on the robocall. I could see that same message on the website or social channels, from local
A
news.
text
And then
alert.
when I did, the text alert, like
Mm-hmm.
multiple channels, because it took probably 3 or 4 passes before it started to permeate, my brain that, okay, yes, that's right. This is what I have to work with. So that's outstanding. And I think the cadence that you referred to, Jerry, I think that's so incredibly important. Like I need to know this isn't the end of the information you're going to give me, that I can come back to you. And I like how you said, like, stay with us. We're your source. We're gonna continue to communicate to you, but you can also get updates on all of these other platforms or channels or mediums out there. It just is. It'll have a calming effect without a doubt. It will help people to begin to process, and then I think critically think about what's needed from me, right? So you've told me what happened. You told me like what what you're doing right now. And then I think that missing piece in a lot of communications, outwardly from schools in crisis, is what do you want from the parents? What do you want from the students? What do you want from the community member? Because they all want to help. And if you don't give them something,
They're
they will
still going to do something. Right? Yeah.
come with water and blankets and pizza and everything,
Mhm.
right? Everything in between, and be doing things that they feel are helpful, but unfortunately many times are not. So let's talk about that part of it.
Well,
What's that called?
I will go straight
Mhm.
to really the most tragic, and how important it is to communicate reunification and to be able to talk about that before the crisis happens, and that it has been practiced. Parents need to know up front what that's going to look like before it happens on the worst day possible.
Well,
And so that is something, Michele, I think that in today's world, that will come to mind right away. Even if, let's say the communication is, we had an intruder, the kids are safe. Still, the mindset's going to be, how am I going to get to my child the fastest? And so to communicate reunification, I think, is very important, because I know that as a parent, and all three of us are, that is going to come to mind right away.
Yeah, without a doubt, without a doubt. And I think at this point, people have already seen, kind of B-roll clips on the news of reunifications gone wrong. They've certainly seen ours, and so those haunting images are very much in the forefront of their minds when one of these crises begins to unfold.
Lori, how else do
Yeah.
we communicate to
Yeah.
parents? I know that's a key. You've touched on reunification a lot over the years, that how impactful that is.
Well, yeah, I think again, this is something we've learned over time, and learned that how important it is for school systems and law enforcement to get parent reunification done right and done quickly as possible, because the longer that process takes, the more trauma it causes for everyone involved. And in my experience, a lot of schools don't practice this yet. They don't have a good understanding, because I think it has really fallen more in, maybe, I don't know if you want like a lane for law enforcement more than it has been in a lane for school districts, right? And so trying to blend that so that you're practicing it together is really important. But to that point, during the crisis, making sure that we're not forgetful to communicate directly to the families that are going to be impacted, whether it is where do they go for parent reunification, what to expect when they show up for parent reunification, or where they can go in terms of getting more information. And we do this with media too. Like we don't want the media right next to the school. We want the media in a place that can be controlled with law enforcement, and we'll provide you all the information there. Again, to protect those who might be impacted the most from whatever the media is capturing by being so close. I think about the heart-wrenching images we saw on the news from the Uvalde tragedy, and how there was that missed opportunity to better inform the families about where to be and how to best support them after the crisis as well, right? And one thing that we learned from that particular tragedy is not communicating that the crisis is over. I think that's easy to do because, again, you're just managing so many things. And when the crisis is finally over, whatever it is, you have to still communicate and get out and say, hey, it's over. And now here's what we're going to do to heal, or a first step we're going to take to start towards healing.
Great point. It doesn't end, right? It doesn't end when the thing is contained. It doesn't end when reunification is complete. There's a lot of work beyond that. Continued communication. How are we moving forward from this? Where are resources? Where will you get information? How will you be updated on how we're managing this? All of that is, unfortunately, I think for a lot of communities where it falls apart. They'll sort of fight their way through the before and the during, and then they're exhausted. Let's face it, they're exhausted by the time to the after. And it is pretty consistently an area of challenge for just about every community that we have worked with, without a doubt.
Well, what I've learned from listening to you, Michele, talk is how important it is, the role of that school leader to not give up or stop at that point, right? They may be in shock themselves, but the amount of buffering that person can take on for the families that are most impacted for something like that. I've learned that from you. And that's something that I think is an important message for school superintendents moving forward. They have to communicate, and they have to keep communicating.
You absolutely do. And I think, though, let's honor what you just said there about that the leaders are going to be impacted themselves. So there is going to be that exhaustion, their own trauma impact, all of that. So let's talk about what are resources to help that leader continue on with the rest of the job. What are some of those things, Jerry?
Well, I'm going to direct this right to Lori because she went through it. And Lori, I mean, I could talk about how that's communicated, but directly to support administrators and administrative teams that have been through a tragedy. Lori, can you describe a little bit about what you went through and how that laid out?
Yeah, I think the tragedy that I experienced really from a high level was students behaving poorly outside of school time or outside of my jurisdiction or lane and to control, and the sheer anger that was felt globally came all to my front face, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I was the target for that. And that's an important thing that we talk about too for crisis communication, is that our number one priority is the safety of our kids. So even when they do something that really is harmful, we can't throw them under the bus. We can't, they're still kids.
Yeah, they are.
And we have to take care of them. And that was a really hard line to walk because there was so much anger. I am not a good person to talk about the resources for that administrator because I didn't do a good job of self-care. I remember the police chief coming in with my husband with food. This was like an 8-week crisis response for us. And I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping, and they were trying to get me just up out of a chair to walk because I felt like I had to take care of every minute detail of what was transpiring. So I think it's important, lessons learned that to share with others that they maybe are thinking, oh, that's not going to happen to me, is to think about the what ifs, and what if something like that happens to you? How do you take care of yourself? Have those conversations with your family members in advance, right? Like, how can you best support me if I'm going through something like this? Or not being afraid to seek medical support or attention if needed.
That's really powerful. Every superintendent I know, principal I know, school leader I know that has walked through a tragedy with their community has a story like yours.
Mm.
There
It's
has
a
to be
million
healing.
different. Yeah, there does. And this idea that you have to bear the weight of it all on your shoulders
Mm-hmm.
is so harmful. It's not just harmful to you and your family, it's harmful to the school community and the healing process and all of that. If everything rests on one pillar, if everything's leaning on that one pillar, it's just, physiology and physics is going to
Right.
eventually it's going to crack.
Well, and here's some things too, lessons learned around that is you don't have to be alone, right? And so we will often say to our other superintendents, like, call for help, reach out for help. And don't be afraid to get help, not only for yourself, but for those who are on your team and around you. But think about those who are most vulnerable. And again, in these situations, it's our students. And what kind of resources and supports are we putting in place to minimize the trauma that they're experiencing?
Well said.
Part of the healing process is to communicate post-crisis. And it isn't just to say that it's over, but this could be a week later, this could be a month later, is to be transparent about what did we learn through this situation? How are we going to be better? Maybe bringing the community in for a survey, allowing them to give feedback about how they would like to receive communication in the future. And then also that avenue that Lori just talked about, talking about community resources that are available for those who are still hurting. There is a level of compassion there that will help bring the community together if you continue to communicate well after the crisis has ended.
I really like the idea of that feedback loop, right? How can here's some things we know we learned, but we know we're not done learning. So we want to hear from you. What did you learn? What can we do better? Really maintaining that kind of circle the wagons mentality. Like, this is our community. We need to do this together. I think there's a lot of power in that. As a parent, I think, all of us here have received information after a crisis and been directed toward mental health resources, which is good. It's a start, right? But that can't be the only thing that we're providing post-crisis, So I really like that engagement piece. A lot of people have a lot to say, and if you don't give them a place to communicate that, where are you going to find that?
It's therapeutic.
I think that's really important. Yes.
People need to get that off their chest to be able to let it go.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. I was just presenting to a group of Minnesota superintendents. They're new superintendents, and we were talking about crisis communications. And at the end, I asked who had questions, and they said, how do we communicate in a crisis when we know we did something wrong, like we messed up? And because often our communications will have some type of statement that the safety of our students is our top priority.
Yes.
And how can we say that? It's going to fall on deaf ears, right? Because we messed up. We didn't have the safety nailed down in this particular situation. And I said, the best thing you can do in a situation like that is own it and say, we've learned how to do this better, and we're going to do better, but do it in a way that you're engaging your community, bring them in the doors. It's not a simple communication. It's a long-term engagement process, but it's one that helps build that trust and transparency to say, we want to do better, and collectively, we're smarter together. Mm-hmm. How are we going to continuously improve in this effort?
Oh, that's excellent. That's excellent. So many things to think about. For sure, you guys are coming back, right? We're going to do this again.
Happy to.
So we're definitely bringing you back. But I think this is a good point for us. We've given everybody enough to kind of chew on, to take back to their schools and communities and think about crisis communication differently. Think about communication differently. Think about how we support our schools and communities differently and better. So I would like to invite you guys at this time to sound off. What is it that you want us to walk away with? If there's one thing we take, what's that little pearl of wisdom, that nugget, as you said, Jerry, that we can take off and put into action in our schools and communities? So if we can, let's go ahead and start with you, Jerry, and then Lori will give you your own opportunity as well.
Planning. And also that we are imperfect. Communication is a medium that is an eye of the beholder type of product, that there is really no perfect form of communication. And that if you go to bed at night as a communicator and you can live with that, it allows you to think clearly and better serve. And as an administrator, it allows you to be able to work your way through the stress a little bit better, because just understand that communication's an easy target for complaints. And we're going to do our best to prepare for the situation, but also know that not everybody's going to receive it or be willing to receive it in the same way. And that's okay. You do your best, you learn from it, you move on, and you develop best practices as much as you can to ensure that you continue to improve. But just understand, it's never going to be perfect for everybody.
That's good stuff. Lori, can you top that?
Never. I can never top Jerry. But what I would say is that just remember you're not alone, right? You don't have to manage through something that's, again, merely embarrassing or truly tragic on your own. There are a lot of people out there that you can lean into for support. And often that's the best route to take so that we can take care of all those who are impacted by our decisions, our words, and our actions. And just remember that the Donovan Group is always here to support that effort too.
We love you guys. You guys are great resources to us, to our community. We'll keep putting out lots of good stuff like this podcast to help our schools and communities think about it. But I know I walked away with a whole bunch of things to think about. I'm just so grateful to you guys and the way that you support our schools and communities, keeping us all safe and sound. This has been The Sound Off with Dr. Lori and Jerry. Thank you so much for joining us. It has been a powerful conversation about crisis communication.